Everybody to this week's edition of Founders Talk. Today we have Roi Ewell talking about, we're going to have a discussion about unfair advantage. Roi has a really incredible background in building strategy for organizations, all the way from SeaWorld, right, which is one of them, to doing his own consulting, helping organizations throughout the United States, and then also at a local company called Big Vision, where he's the chief strategy officer. So I want to welcome Roi to the stage, the hot seat today, and so Roi, before we get into the meat, tell us a little bit about your journey developing strategy for organizations and some of the work you're doing now around that.
Well, thanks, Kyle. And again, good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to spend some time with you. I should respond to this question first by saying I'm a little old. So my journey is pretty extensive. I would say directly or indirectly, I've been involved with planning, and I'll call it business planning. I think later in life it got a little sexier and they said strategy and things like that, but for the most part, whether it's at the holding company level or at the business unit, cascading down to the business unit, I've had for quite some time been involved in planning and strategy development, strategy execution or implementation, probably at a point that I didn't know I was in strategy development and strategy execution. I'll give you a brief sense of my navigation. About 4 years ago, I retired from SeaWorld Anheuser-Busch after 27 years. By way of a remit, held key roles in human resources, marketing, communications, industry affairs, government affairs, and also one of my most enjoyable stints happened to be in public corporate responsibility. It was under the umbrella of public affairs at the time, then it broke away, as it should, into a separate functional arena. So within, obviously, those are very distinct functional disciplines, but the common thread was the advancement of planning. And I would say probably more recently, it's become as enjoyable as it could get for me. I hold a couple of roles. I'm the chief strategy officer for a remarkable organization called Big Vision. Born out of a creative agency framework, and wisely they wanted to develop a business practice as a competitive advantage to separate themselves from a very dense industry called creative services. So I kind of lead the business practice there. Within that, I do a considerable amount of planning for clients, business shaping activities, business sustainability, I like to refer to it. A lot of stakeholder engagement work. Good stuff.
Yeah. So we talked about this a little bit before we got on here. As a person who's responsible for helping organizations develop plans or strategy, implement those strategies, how do you view? And I know that you said you may have some issue with the term, which we can wrestle with today. But how do you view unfair advantage? Like, how do you see, or how do you view unfair advantage? And then how does an organization look for it or create it?
I think I should let the secret out. Before we went live, Kyle and I had a discussion about lexicon. So unfair advantage, I'm not trying to change Webster or anything, but it has always struck me odd. I typically use the term or the terms competitive advantage because it's more emphatic in nature and it doesn't feel like you're operating from a position of softness, or sustainable advantage, which really speaks to, particularly from a social enterprise standpoint, the end game. But that aside, we'll stay with the script.
But yeah, I mean, we would. So
Very
listen. Yeah, okay. So, but the unfair advantage, as I would see it, is something where, like, for example, if I was an organization and I was in the financial marketplace and I was a financial institution, and my unfair advantage was that I had a time machine and was able to jump to the future, see what the market looked like, come back and give my clients that information. That's an unfair advantage, right? And so I kind of view it as, what is that, unfair advantage is that thing that you have that allows you to be more successful or to achieve success than other individuals within your space. And so would you modify that or add anything to that or disagree with that?
I would reluctantly modify it.
Okay, yeah, okay. So how would you reluctantly modify?
Well, I think in the most simple terms, and I advocate simplicity.
Okay.
That the unfair advantage, as we're talking to it today, is something that cannot be copied or replicated easily.
Right.
Right? Okay, so, and it's distinct from your value proposition, because an unfair advantage hones in primarily on competition versus a value proposition really speaks to the distinct difference of a product or service in the marketplace. But to your question, and not a major modification, in all seriousness, I think so it can't be copied, it can't be typically in broad definition or replicated, but it's also, I think, misunderstood a little bit, because sometimes folks who cite an unfair advantage, refer to it as because they were the first to market. Mm. They were the first movers to market. And quite frankly, that's in many instances a disadvantage, an unfair disadvantage, because you can be snatched by a fast follower. Right. Google, Microsoft, Apple, Ford, Toyota, they were not first to market in their categories. Right. But they were very, very fast followers. Okay. And that's significant. With respect to why it's a disadvantage, when you're first, you have to build your product, and then you have to build your market concurrently. And if you stumble along the way, then another fast follower will snatch you up and steal your ideas. Right. So that's one of the interesting aspects about an unfair advantage in the marketplace as a distinction, particularly from a startup. But again, it's all grounded in competition. When you're going back to our strategy discussion up front, when you're talking about an organization, regardless of its intent or mission, strategy is really a good part of your strategy is environmental scan, competition, and whatever tools, whether it's steep or pestle or SWAT, TOES, all those things are really designed to address the unfair advantage for an organization. That point of difference against the competitive set. Excuse me.
Gotcha. So for a startup, or early stage organization, which we deal with, like how do they go about finding something like an advantage or a competitive advantage? How do they go about doing that? Like, what should they be looking for, and how should they be thinking about it?
That's a great question, and I'm not sure if I have that crystal ball, but
yeah,
I do think rarely is your unfair advantage identified in the outset. That's as you're building, you got beta tests, you have all this stuff that you have to do, and the parallels you have to run, but rarely is it first out the gate. So as you crystallize or memorialize your business plan, your channels, your funnels, all those things start to develop, coupled with the fact that it has to be a leap, to some degree, because you're really saying that this cannot be replicated. Now, you do know that it will be replicated. So that's how much of the market can you pick up and establish so that the replication process is real difficult. Yeah. But candidly, from my experience in coming out the gate, I think rarely is your unfair advantage identified in a manner that's significant and sustainable from the outset.
So when does it become identifiable? And can an organization, a startup, can they over time create that advantage, unfair advantage? And if so, then like what are they doing in order to create it? And when is it being identified? Like kind of what's that process look like?
Process, I can give you attributes.
Okay.
Process that would differ by culture and
right.
Because you have, obviously some governance that kind of drive that in some groups. It depends. Smaller social entrepreneur might be a little different than an organization.
Right.
And there's also, I think, a significant difference if you're talking about a mature business, versus a true startup.
Mm-hmm.
So I think there's one way to look at it. You can look at it from an investor profile. What would they chase? But I think there's a couple examples to your point. What would it look like? And this is probably non-traditional or not as conventional. You look at Zappos, right? Going back to early years, before Amazon snatched. Their unique or their unfair advantage didn't make a whole lot of business sense. It was the commitment to the happiness of their employees, their over-the-top customer service, threw away all that stuff that speaks to average transactional time with the customer on the phone or what have you, 365 service. And then what they became was so attractive for a $1.2 billion snatch by Amazon back in 2009. So that unfair advantage, very unique to their culture, very unique to the marketplace, became a competitive strength for them to the degree that Amazon found them worthy.
So it's not always a process, like a piece of technology or a process that you do or patent. What you're saying is that it can also be culturally a cultural thing. It can be an unfair advantage, or like being a social enterprise and caring about this thing could be an unfair advantage when competing. Like if you're making soap or educational products for people, the fact that you're a social enterprise can be an unfair advantage to another group, but depending on how you talk about it. But then also just culturally and how you treat people externally could be. So there's some it could exist both tangible and untangible. Right?
Absolutely,
okay.
Absolutely. And I think there are some things I mentioned earlier on. There might be some attributes to chase down.
Right.
For example, the strength of your team. Do you have a dream team? Do you have inside information with your market segment or your category?
Right.
And a lot of this, pausing for a moment, does have to do with product or service segmentation, right? So how you figure that out against your competitive set, that's huge.
Mm-hmm.
You also have how much authority do you have over your product? And I'm talking beyond patents and things like that. So because that's the competitive, and going back to the definition, it's really difficult to replicate.
Right.
So as much control, your community leverage, your existing customers, the uniqueness of your strategic partnerships, and just to roam on that for a moment, when you talk about strategic alliances, and I think this might be worthy of a moment on for this session, you really have kind of, at least in my lowly opinion, three. You have operational alliances, you have strategic alliances, and you have business alliances. Mm. All these alliances need to be structured in a manner that you cannot achieve these business results independently. There's not anything arbitrary about a strategic alliance. Right. It's a little different than some naming things you do or you see people do. Strategic alliance, if it's operational, that's efficiencies, right? So you bring this partner in to achieve efficiencies, channels, what have you, that you couldn't get.
Right.
The business is more it's more relative to your industry sector. So I need this person or this player to expand my relevance.
Right.
And then the strategic is really where you have this slant on competition. So you really have three groups of alliances potentially you can pursue to advance your business aims.
Right.
And also to drive this thing called unfair advantage. But this is where I really like to say, well, for competitive positioning, so that's why kind of unfair, I move away from, oh, that's unfair, and I know this is just soft,
right.
But it's really your competitive strength.
Okay, so let me ask you that. Go back through that really quickly. You said there's three. The three are operational,
right,
business, and strategic.
Strategic.
Operational alliances are, I'm working with I'm providing a product or service, but I have someone who I'm working with to provide me with there, and maybe I can find another partner who can deliver that product to me faster, cheaper, or better, and so that I partner with them. Is that in order to gain that efficiency or that advantage? Is that am I speaking about that right?
Yeah, and it's I probably, if we're looking at it based on something you produce, it's transactional.
Right.
So it's pipeline.
Okay.
You're getting efficiencies.
Okay.
That you couldn't gain independently.
Okay. And is there a difference between a partner and a vendor?
No, not necessarily.
Okay, so they're synonymous.
Well, yes. I mean, one could be. Yeah, it could be synonymous. I view a vendor could be. Yes, they could be both.
Okay.
But
Okay.
the reason why you asked that question, it's a little blurred.
Yeah.
I would say a vendor provides a service,
Right.
that enhances your ability to deliver your product or service. A partner has this independent entity,
Right.
that for this need, you come together.
Okay. Gotcha.
So,
So there's benefits for both,
Right.
beyond money, but okay, gotcha. So that's the business partnership. I'm sorry, operational. The business partnership is more about who is the makeup of the team of individuals that make up the organization, right? And so it's like saying, okay, well, where are the gaps at? Who do I need in order to fill those gaps? And the gaps could be in thought leadership, and as you define as relevance, that make us more relevant. So is that accurate?
Yeah, and these are all alliances.
Okay.
So business, whether you call it a partnership or an alliance, they just have different flavors depending on the need and the nature of the organization.
Right.
So some folks might just have I don't want to get lost in the framing, except that there are probably three areas of strategic partnerships that any organization can weave in and out of.
Okay.
When they're approaching
a
partnership relationship.
Okay. And then the last one you said was
strategic. Yeah. Which is more competitive based.
More competitive based.
Right. So it's how it's more your insights, that you secure. That's probably more on the thought leadership side.
Right.
And your partnering is done specifically for that.
Okay.
So.
Okay. Gotcha. Okay. So obviously strategy, planning, creating, implementing strategies is a critical component of creating an unfair advantage. What are some of those how should, or what's your thought when you develop a strategy in helping them, how should they be going about, or some of the key things they should be considering when creating a strategy that helps them propel their business and create an unfair advantage? What are some of those? What's your thoughts on that?
Well, I'm sure from listening to their description of their various offerings, it seems like they're way down the road with strategy. So, folks, I have to say we're all friends. Strategy means a lot of different things to different people, different things. I mean, it's, I kind of use a military analogy. You never heard anyone strategize in a battle.
Right.
They're led into battle. So strategy is kind of a front end activity that precedes execution.
Right.
and implementation. So,
which is hard to do in a startup environment, right? Because it feels like when you're in a very early stage, like you're kind of trying to do both simultaneously.
I think strategy is difficult to do in mature businesses,
right?
Because you have ecosystems that have been developed over time that when there's a need to pivot or change and become more relevant or viable, it's difficult to move the foundation of this organization unless you're wired that way. But I think strategy is basically, gaining the insights. The work has been done in many cases, gaining the insights, making sure that you're doing the environmental scans that I mentioned. You have the relevant and absolute things.
Right.
Make sure that and determining what's actionable.
Okay.
I can't dress up strategy and make it too cute. It's strategy. It's how the rigor behind gathering the marketplace insights, the application to your product and service. Looking at where you play and how you play. All the product segmentation work you have to do, and then you plan and then you move.
Right.
So not to overly simplify it.
Yeah.
But you can get into the tools, and that's when we'll lose friends if we start talking about strategic planning tools and what have you. So
yeah. So this is it's essentially it is a continuous activity, and I think that as a startup, one of the things we can do is we kind of sometimes fall into a couple of camps. First camp is we can plan, and we can try to get everything right, and then we don't go out there and we don't create, and that's at the very first front end of the stage, right? And we don't get into the process of like validating and proving out our product, right? And then we can get to that stage where we're just all heads down, just trying to validate and prove, and we can lose sight of all of that other stuff, right? Like to remembering to scan the landscape, right? To look for strategic partnerships. Like, what's some of the advice that you can give to entrepreneurs now who are like who have to be focused on proving, validating, traction? Like, is there any like Roy's golden nuggets, like take an hour of your day or 2 hours of your day or a time a week to scan and do these certain activities to make sure you're not caught off guard, you're able to adjust and adapt as you move forward? Like what, you got any insights on that?
Well, I think it's all about your metrics.
Okay.
I think if you obviously there's an integration of your business plan, which is being it has, obviously there's some remarkable work being done. Your business plan being fully integrated with your strategic plan. Mm-hmm. And that's why your business plan is somewhat of a cornerstone, right? You're going to move on, these assumptions,
right?
To walk down the street. Your strategic plan typically has a sort of window about the tactical considerations that you want to deploy to get there. So daily activity, and that daily probably wouldn't be reasonable, but I think metric development is so critical, and because that's really the most important output of your strategic planning process. From an entrepreneurial standpoint, I think maybe here I go with another 3 categories of something, but I think your measures should be capacity based, they should be impact based, and these are in no particular order, and also activity based. So your impact is really mission driven. So that's, when you need to tell your story, you can do it in the 30-second elevator speech, if you will. These are the impacts that we will have, whether on the marketplace, consumer lines, what have you. Your activity is your programming.
Well, before you go, I want to unpack each one of those. So impact,
mission related.
Impact based is mission. What are some of the key? Like, are there some baseline metrics that people should be like? What are some of the metrics or things that you should be looking at from the?
It really would be whatever your mission statement, which is not subject to change, versus a vision.
Right.
it should link directly to that. So whatever you say you do, that you should have impact measures, at least 3 associated
Okay,
with
so
that.
at least 3.
Yeah.
Okay, gotcha.
And no more than 3.
And no more than 3.
No more than 3.
Okay.
Yeah.
So our fellows and other social entrepreneurs who are also simultaneously putting together a theory of change, which should be aligned with their business model, are creating impact goals. Like they're saying, okay, here's what we believe the world should look like, and then what you're saying is that one of the key things, which is also in there, is that they should be developing metrics that help determine whether or not they're making that change. And you're saying that probably at an early stage and probably even afterwards, that you should probably just have 3 core ones. Not saying you can't have auxiliary ones,
Oh, yeah.
but like three core.
Yeah, I think 3 core that support your, again, and I may be oversimplifying, but it supports your elevator speech.
Right.
So because impact is really your mission. It's what you do. And in some sense, and particularly with this talented group, it's who they are.
Right.
So you want to be very clear about both of those platforms.
Right.
So I think I spoke to mission.
So that's impact, and then you said the next one was, I think, capacity.
Capacity it's a utilization. So
Okay.
if it's a classroom situation, or if it's more space, if it's run rate, how many people are going through your program, what's the utilization? Because that helps you speak to your investors about the quality and receptivity of your product.
Okay.
But it's capacity.
Okay.
Do you have the capacity, and how's the capacity being utilized?
Okay. So, for example, so capacity is from a markets or product standpoint, it's like are you trying to, you're selling a product or service, and you're trying to understand what's the current capacity, and are you maximizing it? What's future capacity?
Yeah,
how you get there?
It's a marriage of evidence of demand and your delivery system.
Mm-hmm.
Gotcha. So our fellows should be thinking about, which they're about to enter an experiment phase, where they are out there and their job is to show whether or not people want what they have, right? And whether this is okay.
Part of it is the validation, as you refer to.
Right, which is then evidence that people want it, and then you said the method of.
Well, the capacity is now you're a supplier.
Okay.
Right. So,
Right.
And or if they come and see you, just do you have the capacity to deliver on your promise?
On your promise.
Yeah, so.
And then you said evidence of, there's a second piece.
Well, it's really your validation. I said evidence of demand.
Okay.
Your validation of the demand where it exists,
Mm-hmm.
and your delivery system's ability to deliver.
To deliver.
The delivery system deliver, a little redundant, but yeah.
And if you may not be maxed out, right? I mean, like you like there could be a capacity you haven't
absolutely.
reached yet.
Absolutely.
You recognize that it's there. You state that it's there, and then you, as an early stage entrepreneur, one of the key activities is showing how you can live into that capacity or
That's why it's a capacity metric.
Metric.
So you always know where you are on the journey. So in other words, you're monitoring against plan.
Right.
And how do you do that? By having reasonable, understandable, believable, achievable metrics.
Okay.
So, and that's the capacity. So,
okay. So each one of these startups, these early stage startups, should be looking at having a clear understanding of what's the capacity of the market that they're sitting in, and reasonably and putting reasonable expectations on how they can get into that. I mean, because I think it gets into this, like, people, especially entrepreneurs early on, like, they talk about a market, and that market is huge, right? And it's like way too broad, and it's like, no, that's not really your addressable market, right? Like, you can even segment it further. Your addressable market is here.
Maybe not your immediate market.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. But they should understand what that market is, that total addressable market is, and show how they can deliver what they're that is realistic and that they can deliver into it. And if they can't do it now, then obviously create a plan or show a plan to be able to get there.
Exactly.
Okay.
And also where you would want to build capacity.
Oh,
By building, whether you decide at a certain point, well, I need to divest my activities in this arena so I can invest in this arena.
that's interesting.
Yeah, so that's
Okay.
There's another. So that's just the beauty of metrics without.
Right.
So you're just really monitoring the things that help you win.
Okay. So when you talk about that divesting, because this is new, so I didn't have this on the list. So you talk about divesting. So you can have two pieces. You can be in different places, right, with different products or services that feel like they're aligned or going like, but they might not be. You may have to divest from some of those in order to grow the business or get where you're.
Right. The front end would be your product segmentation. Where should I be? Why?
Right.
What's the obstacles to entry? What's the runway? All that stuff, right?
Right.
And then as you go down the road, depending on what's working, what's not, degree of difficulty, there's always barriers that jump up.
Right.
And since we're talking about unfair advantage, those fast followers get faster.
Right.
So, you might need to realign your resources just from a standpoint of good stewardship
Right.
of resources to
Yeah.
shed this so you can maximize or optimize elsewhere.
Right. The key is not to be diluted. You don't want to dilute, especially as an early stage startup. I mean, it's very your resources are already at a minimum, right?
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
dilution, you have to really quickly figure out like how am I going to maximize these resources that I have, which are very little, to achieve the objective. And I know that as startups, oftentimes one of the things we do is that we can spread our resources too thin, right? And we don't align them perfectly because we say okay, and we have to think about things like, okay, what's the beachhead thing? Like what's the first thing we move in that then opens the gate up to the second thing? And so I really like what you were saying around divesting the
I just think, particularly going back, harping on this metric thing.
Yeah.
It's hand in hand with your financials. If
Right.
an investor is asking you a question, they want metrics, mainly around traction.
Right.
So that's
Okay.
how they're gonna take a peek at that, I'm sure.
Yeah. So you had impact, capacity, and then there was a third one.
Activity.
Activity. Okay, let's talk about that one.
And that's really your programming. Let's say whatever your day-to-day effort is, what you deliver, that's your programming. That's the activity.
Right.
That's either the face-to-face with your customer base or your systems that have routine output.
Right.
So you want to track that.
Right.
So it's just metrics. I mean, please don't be wed to my descriptions, but just what I use.
Right.
But there's impact, which is mission, which kind of makes sure it implies a check that, okay, who we say we are, this is who we are, and what we said we do, this is what we do. And that's the impact, because that's the impact on the marketplace, consumer base, or whatever. And then how you get there is through activity-based stuff.
Right.
And then you have, in order to sustain, you have to take a look at your capacity measures. So it's, and I have examples which I don't have with me, but I'm happy to send it to you. And if it's of any interest to the team on the phone, you can pass it on.
Yeah. So one of the things I really like what you're saying is that in terms of the activity metric is that day to day you should be you need to say, okay, I'm gonna put some goals out there. Like when you talk about customer interface, like I'm gonna interface with a certain number of customers, and the goal is to do this because I need the purpose of doing this is for X, right? But I need to measure first, put that metric in place, and then say what I'm trying to achieve, and go about every day trying to hit that number and looking at if I'm hitting that number or not. So if my goal is to see, like if I'm an early stage company, my goal is to make 100 phone calls to potential customers every day, then that's one of the metrics that I look at. And if we're not doing well, and I go back and I look that we're making 50 calls a day, then we're saying, okay, well that's not Like when we make 100 calls a day, we do well. When we make 50 calls a day, we do terrible. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, and I think you raise a very good point, Kyle. What I tend to be sensitive about, particularly in consulting activities, is don't get locked into run rate, or the channels that you're exploiting. 100 calls a day. Make sure that your metric speaks to conversions.
Right.
Not the calls.
Okay.
So that's really truly an activity.
Right.
But your metrics should speak to the engagement, the desired engagement, or in this case, a conversion.
Right.
You're making the calls for
Right.
a conversion.
For conversion.
Right.
Right.
So 200, 300 would be arbitrary and meaningless unless you had a metric that says our business is based on X amount of conversions based on these transactional activities.
Right.
So that's
and that's what we talk about to the fellows about. Like in terms of like understanding what are those processes and systems that you can go through that are repeatable that allow you to convert a customer, and understanding what that looks like, at least being mindful of what that is and documenting that, and then trying to find efficiencies within there or capacity. I mean, we talk to them a lot about that, and so that's a key activity. Do you remember any of the examples that you said? Like you were talking about sending us some examples of.
Let me come back to that.
Okay.
Because
you can send it to us.
I'll send it to you.
Yeah.
I'm kind of in my mind going through different organizations and companies.
Okay.
So it's and by the way, since this is a strategy, unfair versus advantage versus anything else, let's just spend a moment, because metric, there is a sequence, right? Mm-hmm. So you have a goal setting activity, based on whatever the nuance is. We're getting hammered, or we're just coming out the gate with a new business idea. So you have your goal setting, which is anchored with a business plan, which is supported with some type of strategic review, mm-hmm. including competitive landscape, threats, opportunities, all those kind of things, strengths, weaknesses. And then you have, from that, tactics. And then those tactics are anchored with metrics.
Okay.
And then your supporting activities, so you don't drive yourself crazy, you have a meaningful dashboard that captures your key performance indicators. Mm-hmm. And that's really it. I mean, that's simplistic. It should be that simple.
Right.
Now, strategic planning work is messy. I mean, folks take days to come up with a mission and a vision, and it's ugly. But it can be simple. This is probably dated, but I remember when I first started paying attention to this space, what was Pepsi's vision statement? Distinctively, a vision is what success looks like in the future, and it's fluid. Once you get there, you got to have another one. Right. The mission shouldn't change. Right. I mean, unless you do a completely rebrand or something. But I remember, long days when I was at the corporate level, mission planning, vision planning, and then the facilitator said, "You want to know what Pepsi's vision statement is? It's 2 words: beat Coke."
Oh wow!
That's it.
That was it.
Beat Coke. Now, the beauty of that is, it might sound too simplistic, but it resonates throughout the entire organization. There is not a business unit in Pepsi who won't understand what their contributions would be to that. So it can be that simple.
Right.
So that's the point that I just want to emphasize. So, but that's a vision. Now, to address the market particulars, that's where your planning and all that comes in, and look at what does the competitive set really look like. But I do want to promote, there is room for simplicity.
Yeah.
And there's some governors too. When you talk, well, does it cascade? Does it clarify your intent? This is probably more on the value proposition. Does it is it easily validated
Right.
based on organizational activity?
Right.
So
Gotcha.
those
Gotcha.
kind of things.
Yeah. So definitely, for early stage social ventures, your unfair advantage might not be easily identifiable up front. It doesn't necessarily have to be tied to the way the product that the specifics of the nature of the product or how it's delivered. It can be intangible things like culture, the way you treat people. There's definitely a planning element to it where you can start to create advantage on how well you plan and steward the organization, and then understanding what are those metrics that you will engage in or look at in order to understand if you're getting to where you need to go, such as impact, capacity, activity, and then more importantly, the mission, like being very super clear on the mission. And you do that in the simplest form, then you can look at that box at unfair advantage and say, okay, like this doesn't feel so far out of reach, or maybe I don't have one, and it feels more achievable.
Absolutely.
Okay.
You know, I think in terms of describing activities, I could probably offer some decisions, some key decision points,
Mm-hmm.
you know, for a startup.
Okay.
If they're looking to gain or to identify, gain, or even implement an unfair advantage.
Right.
One would be how good is your management team, period. You know, and quite frankly, you have to have someone else beyond yourself do that assessment.
Right.
But how
Is that a death knell? Not to have. I mean, you know, just like define management team. Does that mean you and someone, a founder, or is that a combination you, a founder, and board, or is that? And if you don't, and if it's just you and you don't have a board, should you really quickly, because this is a key thing, right, that you're talking about, like, should you really get focused on diversifying and building your team?
Well, I think fundamentally it really relates to the product and service that you're promoting.
Yeah.
So really, do you guys know what you're talking about?
Right.
Where's the evidence of expertise,
Okay, evidence of
what have you?
expertise. Gotcha.
You know, in terms of structure, depending on the organization.
Right.
But I'm really talking about startup.
Yeah.
So, you know, have you surrounded yourself with the right people, or are you that person, and that's sufficient?
Right.
The other decision that I think needs to be wrestled with is how big is the opportunity? You know, I think that's really, really important. And I'm looking at this through an investor's lens. You know, they want blue collar CEOs. You know,
Right.
They want folks who will roll up and, you know, not the dreamers. You know, that they can see things. And you know, I think the opportunity. You know, obviously there's thresholds. You know, if you're looking at, you know, 5 million over 5 years, that's probably not attractive. So to an investor. So just based on how it pencils. Another piece would be traction. You know, what positive traction can you communicate or claim that you've achieved? That's, you know,
Right.
early results. You know, so
Right.
now you're packaging your story.
Yeah.
You know, and then you have the front end stuff that you're really just executing on.
Yeah.
So that's a huge one. Probably I don't want to lose sight of this because, you know, where's the passion? You know, are the founders, if you will, truly passionate about this? And that's going to be tested because you can over-index on passion and under-deliver on, you know, the business side. So
Right.
We talked about financials and metrics, and you have to kind of be able to address the risk. You know, whether you do a steep analysis or something, you know, where is the risk?
Right.
You know, and when you address the risk, the only thing an investor would want to know outside of the risk is what's the mitigation. So, you know, you can't stand out there by itself. Well, I did a great job, but hey, this is coming around the corner and what have you.
Right.
in order for your business model to be viable, then what's your mitigation, which really speaks to your unfair advantage. Mm-hmm. Because now whether it's your technology or whatever your version of IP is, that's the driver.
Oh man, that's awesome. That's awesome. I think this is a perfect opportunity to open it up for our fellows to be able to ask some questions. So during this segment, what I want to do is, everybody keep your mic off, but then when you're ready to ask a question, just open up your mic. Just be conscious of that. Did you mute them or unmute them?
Unmuting them.
Are you muting them?
Unmuting.
Oh no, mute them, and then they can unmute themselves.
Okay.
Yeah. All right. Okay, so whenever you're ready to ask a question, just unmute your mic and ask your question, and then just remute it so that we can all hear our oracle's response. Our great sage.
Hello, I'm Angela Timbrook. I appreciate your insight and thoughtful unpacking of this unfair advantage thing. So one of my questions, operationally as a startup, one of the things that, I'll speak for myself. The challenge that I have is I'm the thought leader in this, and I have people who work for me. But as a startup, I can't really afford a COO or CFO and stuff like that. So what I have done is, for myself, is I have offered equity share or in my company to people for business modeling and so forth. Just small amounts to be a part of the team, so that when I go to present to an investor, that I have all the kind of holes filled and people can talk their talk. Because as a entrepreneur of my type, I need to have people who talk the talk of the investor crew. And so, do you think that that's I feel like that's my unfair advantage is that I've been able to attract people to the dream. But the people who I have attracted, I've just given, small equity shares. So they're technically founders with me. Mm-hmm. And they have helped me with my pitches and stuff to the investment crew. Is that what you mean in operational?
I would say both operational and strategic, Angela. I think that's very well thought through. What you did your gap analysis, right? You eliminated the holes. And,
yes.
And investors chase voids. They 90% say no, right?
Right.
Because you don't see the infrastructure framing. And it sounds like you nailed it. I'm not sure how much of it's evergreen, from your business model. In other words, I know they're investors from an equity point of view, but it sounds like for your initial build out, it's a perfect solution.
Well, it's the fact that I don't have a lot of money to pay people to do a financial model that does, waterfall and IS and
right.
That I can do. I can give you a P&L from my QuickBooks, but for me to be able to do financial modeling to show the pro forma and the model as it goes, I think the thing that I have is hey, look, I have value in my company, and my value is that we can produce this. But I'm not I don't have the time or the expertise to learn an MBA program from Wharton, and the guys that I've been able to who come to work with me, went to Harvard and Wharton and those kind of things, and it hasn't cost me any money. So I was looking to, because I try to explain that to people that look, this is the way that I've set up my business because, no, they're not. They're in their business suits. They look a certain way, like I do when I go to investor meetings. But I've often wondered was that I think it's the best thing for me. But when I tell people about it, sometimes they look at me like, well, why would you share some of your business? Well, in order for me to move faster, I have to find strategics and operational partners who can help me.
Yeah, and so I think one of the things we talk about here at Rally is how the fellows have to be really honest about who they are and what their gaps are, right? And we used to do that. We used to have them sit down and say, okay, well, where the gaps are, because what you said reign really true is that investors chase voids, right? And so one of the things that I would encourage our fellows to do is to understand clearly what your gaps are and be honest with those gaps. And because they're there doesn't mean that your business won't be successful, but you need to at least build a roadmap or talk about how you're going to fill those gaps, because investors are going to want to hear that, right? Absolutely. So like being conscious of that, you need to be conscious of where those voids at. Are there any other? Thank you, Angela. Any other questions from other fellows for our great sage?
Hey, if I could just add one thing to Angela's point, which I think might be helpful. Angela, I think you took a unique approach, probably from your financial perspective, the necessary approach and with limited options. One thing you might want to consider, since you are giving up equity, because everything should be reciprocal, and although be it a small amount of equity, you might want to give your adjunct team a script, or have some accountabilities. That they're responsible for the creation of a beta, for the viability of your product. You might want to have them engage in the initial piloting of customers, and also for roping in strategic partners. Just very top line consideration. So there's an accountability piece from you that coincides with the equity.
Yeah, matter of fact, I'm glad you talked about that, because very early on when I started my education startup, I got this from when I was over at an Accelerator I was involved in out of Austin, and it was a sheet that showed different levels of equity and what each level was required, or what was the expectation on each level of equity. For advisors, it never got above 1%, like ever. And it hovered somewhere between 0.5, 0.75%. 1% was an exceptional advisor that you gave equity to, but it did assign those accountabilities to that. So one of the things I'm gonna do is I'm gonna toggle that in my mind, and I'm gonna share that piece with the group on the Slack channel, and I'll make that available to you guys so you can see what Roy is saying. Because I think that's very critical. Because what you can do is have partners, co-founders, or advisors who you assign equity to, and there's no accountability. You've given out the equity. So there's some. So this at least allows you to establish what your expectation is, and then also one of the things that I think that Roy would agree with is that you might want to put a period of vesting into that potentially, right? Like you don't receive this until this thing is met, right?
Yes.
Okay. You just don't hand it out. Here's your 1%. And then, by the way, here's what I'd like you to do. But then by that time, the 1% is already yours.
Yeah, unless there's a limited partnership and capital calls or something like that.
Right.
We have cliffs. I mean, we work on cliffs too.
Okay.
So if you don't produce in a certain amount of time,
that's
they
awesome.
cliff off.
Yeah, that's awesome. Good stuff. Anybody else? Yes, go ahead.
It's Marlena with Move Up, and one of my favorite parts is when you were talking about the metrics, and you encouraged to, instead of counting numbers of phone calls for an activity metric, actually measure what matters, the conversions. My question is, it's so easy for customers and team members to get excited about those not so important metrics. So in the case of us, it's number of downloads, and really for me, number of downloads doesn't matter. What matters is how many classes are taken, and then what knowledge is applied in the end learner's life. How do you get a team to stop focusing, and even the customers themselves, to stop focusing on those numbers and start really focusing more on the impact numbers?
Great question, Marlena. What I would simply suggest is a reframe. One's secondary, one's primary metrics. So you don't toss them away, because that's part of your morale system, it sounds like. But you triage. the metrics, because you really, the main thing is to keep the main thing the main thing. So, I would definitely give some thought to transitioning them into where the impacts are. And then the rest of it's supporting activity. It's part of your pipeline.
Great, thank you. That's helpful.
Yeah, that's awesome. Anyone else? Going once. Suzanne?
Yeah, no, because we're just not at the stage yet to have maybe we're starting to be any sort of people doing a function with any equity involved, or should we be trying to do that, or is just, our partner organization is great, and part of it is the cultural thing that it's kind of just handshake based and we trust each other, but should we have like a MOU or something in place of agreement of equity upon certain deliverables? How should I be doing it at this really early on part of our venture?
So the team, the team, there's two of them. I don't even think that the legals haven't been figured out yet, but they're at the stage now where they're starting to invest in property or things that should become the property of the organization, and so I just want to give you that insight. And there's two of them right now.
I see.
Yeah.
Suzanne, I would. I don't think there's an issue of ever too soon. Without walking through, there's about 12 to 15 considerations, which I'll call a decision tree, that you can walk through independent of active investing going on. But that will help you frame out your position, particularly if you're about to acquire assets. And I won't speak in a legal manner, but if you're about to acquire assets, which you'll have to justify why these assets will be beneficial from an investor's lens, then what I'm happy to do is give you 3 decision points that you just might want to consider as you build this out. So it's more of a guidepost. You can kind of check the box. It's not necessarily linear, so you don't have to worry about a step process. So wherever you are at the time, you may or may not have an application, but in totality, it probably will. Hope that.
Yeah.
I was thinking about you saying that you discover very rarely do you start out with your unfair advantage, you know what it is, and it sticks the same, that you discover it as you're going. And I really liked when you said the competitive advantage is something that's very hard for someone else to replicate or duplicate, whether that's the culture they've created at Zappos or a unique idea about how to deliver the product with a strategic partnership. So the question I'm kind of revolving around is that competitive advantage something that an entrepreneur ought to surface early, or is it just like the happenstance of good strategy? Like, should I be trying to figure out what is my competitive advantage as I'm launching the social enterprise, or should I just keep an eye out for as I'm following a strategy to see what competitive advantage just happens to emerge?
Great question, and I would, without hesitation, say the latter.
Oh, cool.
Without hesitation. I think you can get lost in nothing.
Yeah.
Trying to figure it out on the front end.
Yeah.
For the simple reason you won't have the resources to attack it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we should be keeping our eye out, because then once we see it, we want to protect it and celebrate it, right? Yeah.
And do your internal testing, being mindful of the fast followers.
Okay,
because you might have that magical, difficult to replicate idea or product or service, but there's another person with the resources who will spend the time and energy to duplicate it.
Yeah.
And then they'll take the market.
Okay.
So.
Right.
Cool.
That's awesome. Okay. I think that's it. One last question? Any other questions? Man.
Thank you for the time. Great being with you.
Well, it was a pleasure. Thank you for all that wisdom that was just expounded. All of you are going to be successful because of it. Both our fellows and those both regionally and internationally who will watch this program, this is a great sage to have. Thank you again. And that's it for this Founders Talk.